Okay, I'm back talking with Will. This time we did Terminator, we've done the Aliens, so now we wanted to look at something that was topical. So we thought we would go over Mandalorians in general, Boba Fett specifically.
But this time we actually watched the first episode of the Mandalorians, the new media so we don't have to speculate about that.
This is true. We have seen it as far as that first episode goes, and we have obviously seen all the movies as far as that goes. I have not seen the holiday special, which we'll talk about in forever.
You've never? Oh, okay.
No, not in a long time. I know someone who has gone and looked it up at any time recently. I also have not read much of the extended media. I know you've read a lot of the comics, which I'm sure Boba Fett and the Mandalorians factor in as well. And you seem to have a pretty good grasp of the anime and animated series that have been on that the Mandalorians also show up in.
Yeah.
So let's get started talking about Boba Fett. He had very humble beginnings, right? So it was someone's project, someone's side pet project on the production staff on the set.
They were trying to come up with new things for The Empire Strikes Back. And they had the snow troopers, and they were trying to come up with an upgraded stormtrooper, or a captain of the stormtroopers, somebody who would have
a Captain Phasma, if you will.
I honestly, when I first saw Captain Phasma walking with really kind of cool scoped out rifle and the cape, the half cape, I thought that J.J. Abrams who was also a fan of Star Wars history, was going to pull in that idea, because Boba Fett Ralph McQuarrie did a stormtrooper who had a cape and a jetpack and the rangefinder. And the helmet originally had, the segmented eyes, but it was behind a visor. And it looked really cool, and they actually slapped it all together. They didn't even have a cape, so they threw a Star Wars towel on him as the placeholder, but they actually had the armor. And if you go up online, you can, and you do the digging, you can find Lee Brackett's original screenplay for The Empire Strikes Back. And Lee Brackett, it was an Oscar-winning screenwriter. She wrote The Searchers. And based on the notes that George Lucas gave her, she wrote a very Flash Gordon-style movie.
I mean, that was the original thing that Lucas was driving for, was trying to bring back Flash Gordon style, so that makes sense that would be the kind of notes she would get from him.
Yeah, but it really comes out more like something that would have been a couple episodes of the Clone Wars, where it's all about whether or not the New Republic or the Empire gets this, what is in essence Cloud City, but Cloud City is a lot more significant a holding, a territory for whichever side.
So you're talking about Bespin, right? So in this original draft, Bespin is a bigger deal.
Bespin's a bigger deal. Lando's more of a Prince Baron type character. And
does he put his hand in a tree stump?
No, he doesn't put his hand in a tree stump, which is still one of the most terrifying things I've ever watched in a movie.
And that creature is disgusting looking too.
For whatever doesn't hold up from Flash Gordon, that scene still terrifies me.
For the record, nothing doesn't hold up from Flash Gordon. I will die on that hill. Nothing doesn't hold up.
There are
nothing.
There are some questionable choices.
Not gonna. All right. So how is Boba Fett in the Lee Brackett?
He's not. He's just. I think he's supposed to be one cool looking stormtrooper.
So he's not even a bounty hunter. He's just stormtrooper.
No. I mean, there's just stormtroopers, and when I'm reading it, I could see him like nowadays we have like the Death Troopers and the Inferno Troopers and all these different. For Solo, they made a cop version of the stormtrooper that we see for 30 seconds of the movie, and it's a great design, but he's not a significant character.
But I guess Stormtrooper's whole thing since the beginning, other than having some of these discrete types, there wasn't a lot of individuality within Stormtroopers. So you might have the Emperor's Guards that have the red thing. You might have their snow outfits. But within all the snow outfits, Stormtroopers, they all look alike. All of a certain kind look alike.
Yeah.
So I find it hard to believe in a sense that there would be this one Stormtrooper that looks like Boba Fett who's just... Or not, maybe not looks like Boba Fett.
A lot of things in Star Wars are there because they look cool, though. They don't... And Boba Fett is...
Well, he's probably the prime example of something that is there because it looks cool.
Right. But the Emperor's Guards don't actually ever do anything.
And Boba Fett doesn't actually do much either.
Right, we'll get into that.
Hasn't hurt his cool factor. So Ralph McQuarrie, he's working behind the scenes. He's getting towels together.
He designs it. Then the Star Wars costuming, the Lucasfilm costuming department pulls together this really cool armor. They make this. You can watch it up on YouTube if you look up Boba Fett prototype armor. There is a 1978 black and white film where it's just them backstage talking through what this is going to be and what they cobbled up, and it's the Boba Fett armor, but it's all white. And
at that point, more along the lines of a type of stormtrooper.
Yes, that is, and they expressly state that he's going to be the captain of the stormtroopers. Then they kind of shelved that because while the Empire Strikes Back script was drastically being rewritten, the bounty hunters become a part of it. Also, one of the major financial wins for Star Wars beyond the box office was the action figures were selling like hotcakes, and they were developing the figures that would be offered for Empire Strikes Back. And one of the incentives they came to push, because this is as they're starting to sell guys who were just in the cantina or...
I had one of those guys. Whichever one had the kind of big looping, like L head.
Oh, Hammerhead.
Yeah.
Moa Nadun.
Somehow I knew you would know their
Moa
official
Nadun.
name.
Hammerhead. Anyhow, you can buy all those guys, and with 4 or 6, I think it was 4 proofs of purchase, you could send off for a Boba Fett figure. And Boba Fett was relatively unknown to us, because I think that came along, and so it was a good way to push lesser characters.
Well, so let's just get the chronology. So we've got Lee Brackett coming up with this design, just working on it.
Lee Brackett writes a version of Empire.
Ralph McQuarrie working on
doesn't have bounty hunters in it.
We have an original script that has no bounty hunters, but that gets changed and bounty hunters are inserted. They have this costume backstage that seems to be, people are enthusiastic about it, looks cool, which it does in its prototypical form. So they decide to marry this armor as one, or this costume as one of the bounty hunters that lines up in the famous scene on the bridge.
And when you look at that scene too, the screeds of licensed fiction have been written about each one of those characters.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we know any of their names because they're on screen for seconds.
Right.
Boba Fett's the only one that has a line.
Yes.
Which essentially is, Vader says no disintegrations, and he says, as you wish. But yeah, even way before the prequels came out, anywhere else, I could go to my friends, and they would have their favorite bounty hunter, whether it's, Bosk, or IG-88, or Boba Fett, or whatever.
Bausch, Bosk, IG-88, Forlom, and Zuckuss.
Right, and the fact that anybody knows those is probably even more egregious than the famous example of people knowing what in Jedi about the Ewoks, because they don't actually ever call them Ewoks in the movies. It's only maybe in the credits and certainly in all the after stuff that Ewoks becomes embedded in pop culture, even though they're never mentioned. These guys are even worse. They're on screen for about 10 seconds, and yet fans across the universe, across galaxies far and wide, know their names, and yes, as you've said, have written and read tons of backstories and fiction about every one of those bounty hunters.
In the movie, they're only referred to as the natives or the locals.
Right.
And then what's even funnier was a kid saving my weekly allowance to buy whatever Return of the Jedi figures I could get my hands on. I had a checklist, and I knew their names, like Logray and Chief Chirpa and Wicket. And
you still know them.
I do.
Decades later, it was still burned into your cerebellum.
It was a big deal. It was a real big deal.
And and if we thought that was just kind of funny, at least they're in it for a majority of the movie in sort of a climactic sense, that they're part of the climactic moments in the arc of the movie, whereas Bosk and IG-88 are literally just two guys standing next to somebody else who, after they're on the bridge, vanish from the movie, have nothing to do with it, and yet they became icons in a sense.
Well,
people talking about IG-88 and stuff years and years later, like, he never did anything. He just stood there. He didn't even say anything.
He couldn't even do anything. I mean, IG-88's head, and I'm sure if I looked it up, there was a practical thing that piece was to, but it's the tap in the back of the cantina. It's the keg.
Right, but it doesn't matter. None of that matters. But Boba Fett...
They just reused a prop, though. That's one of the things I loved. And then when you get to Cloud City... chunks of IG-88 are sitting by the furnace, And this has led people to write
that Boba Fett
elaborate fan fiction.
Well, why not? I mean, that's what fan fiction.
Well, not even just elaborate fan fiction. I believe in at least one video game. I killed IG-88
and put him on the road to the furnace.
Yes, and then we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Well, what I was going to say is, we have these different bounty hunters, each of which has become a legend in the minds of fans everywhere, but Boba Fett stands above them and ahead of them because, one, he actually ends up in more than one fleeting scene, and he has lines. But I think
he's also the only one who scores a win.
Well, they don't show any of the other ones doing anything else, so he was gifted a win, number one. That's the thing. Boba Fett doesn't score jack. Vader does all the work. Boba Fett just gets to walk off with the prize. The only thing he did that was cool is that he hid in the garbage compartment. He hid Slave One in the garbage compartment of the Star Destroyer so that when it spat out the garbage, he was able to mac on Solo and the Falcon heading to Cloud City. That's really the one cool thing he did, which was, I will admit, it was very cool. When you watch it and you think, oh, Solo's gotten away, and then you see that Slave One one-upped them by being in the trash. But other than that, he doesn't do a whole lot. The whole thing is kind of set there, fait accompli for him. But I think we wanted to talk about the holiday special first, because, right, technically that comes before Empire.
I want to say the action figure happened before the Christmas special, but I'm allowing that I could be wrong there, and it's the other way around. They make the Star Wars holiday special, which included a very off-model cartoon done by Nelvana, who did a lot of cartoons in the 70s.
And that has Boba Fett and has Luke and...
It has the Millennium Falcon having to land on this planet, and Han and Luke are beset by a beastie, and Boba Fett shows up riding a dinosaur, and he helps them out, and they're very effusive about how now they're all friends and everything's cool. And then Boba Fett, C-3PO catches him, phoning Darth Vader on a video phone and saying, "I've got them." Then they set a trap, and Boba Fett basically, "I'll be back to get you guys."
I'll be back.
Yeah, it's not very good.
Now, is he named in this one? Has he been given the Boba Fett moniker yet, or
yes,
is he just
yes?
okay,
Because
yeah, go ahead.
There is a moment where Luke says something because R2 and 3PO have observed him talking to Darth Vader, and Luke says something to the effect of, "You're a really good friend, Boba Fett," and R2 makes a disconcerting noise, and Luke says, "What's wrong?" And 3PO says, "R2 says Boba Fett is no friend of ours," and
the rest is history.
Yeah, it's very stilted. It's not a good cartoon.
But the point is that is his first appearance in the actual Star Wars universe canon, is in that holiday special, riding a dinosaur.
Right. And boy, did Star Wars immediately try to forget that ever happened.
Not because of that, but drug-addled monologues. And there were other issues with the holiday special that go beyond off-brand cartoons.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that's wrong.
All right, so we have Boba showing up in the holiday special on a dinosaur. Whatever else with the holiday special, they decide that they like Boba Fett enough to reuse him or repurpose him in Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, and by the time he shows up in Empire, he is probably one of the most visually interesting characters in the Star Wars universe, because where we communicate a lot about our characters and how they dress. Luke Skywalker is a great example. First movie, he's in all white. Second movie, he's in beige. And by the third movie, he's in black with hints of white underneath it. Darth Vader is solid black. Han Solo wears a mix of the two colors. Leia is typically in white, or when she's in Cloud City, she's wearing red.
Or fleshy when they decide to remove 90% of her clothes for Jabba's scenes.
Well, that was... I know there's a whole lot of mystique built up around Slave Leia. Go look at any paintings of Deja Thoris from John Carter of Mars.
It's just a big change, right? Because she wasn't that person before, and then suddenly she is that person.
Yeah, it's...
She's wearing a muumuu, basically, in A New Hope. I mean, she's wearing a down-the-floor gown, and she kicks butt in it, and it clearly is the furthest, almost the outfit you would pick of what can I do to remove as much potential sex appeal from someone as possible. Let's put them in a long, loose-flowing, billowy gown. So you go from that to then basically her wearing essentially the same kind of gear as Han Solo, regular pants and shirts and jackets, and that's fine. And then you get to, it's very practical, right? You get to that bit with Jabba, and it's nothing but it's your chainmail bikini kind of thing.
Right. And again, Lucas's Flash Gordon, John Carter, Mars, all those Warlord.
I don't think you can hold. I mean, I don't want to get sidetracked too far, but I feel like it's unfair to throw that after when you're in the third movie. If that was his influence and it's not there in Star Wars: A New Hope, it's not there in Empire, to suddenly say that he decided to channel in the third movie, I think is a little bit disingenuous. But we can talk about.
Absolutely.
We can have a separate discussion about that. So in Empire,
yeah.
Boba Fett, no disintegrations.
He
does look cool.
He's green. He's beige. He's red.
I think he's beat up a bit. He's
got that
he
crazy.
Looks like he's from elsewhere.
I mean, there's a whole site called thedentedhelmet.com where it is all people making their own Boba Fett armors and
free plug. Send us some money.
They're spending it all making Boba Fett armor, and the fact that Boba Fett has this damage. You know, this distinctive... Somebody shot him in the head and he survived.
Yes, he's not as clean and neat as any kind of stormtrooper. They all look shiny like they're right off the assembly line. Boba Fett looks beaten up.
And he's got a jetpack, which he doesn't use in the first
Yeah, I don't know
appearance.
if we could even say that we would know at that point that it was a jetpack. Is that something that came up in the Christmas special? Because he doesn't use it. It's really just a backpack at that point.
I
With
don't
what looks like a missile
remember him using
it.
it there. I do remember the action figure talking about
his jetpack.
His jetpack, and the other thing is the big deal being that center rocket on the original Kenner action figure fired. They were terrified some kid was going to shoot his eye out, so then they recalled the figure, and those of us who did clip the 4 proofs of purchases and send away for it, got a Boba Fett where the rocket was glued solid in.
Oh, all right.
Shoot our eye out.
So he's in the lineup. Vader looks at him, says no disintegrations, as you wish. He ends up being the one that is able to track Han Solo to Cloud City, which is the one cool thing that he does. Vader's already there. Vader sets up the whole thing. Even the carbonite has nothing to do with Boba Fett. That's Vader wanting to test it out on another guinea pig before Luke shows up. And then, essentially, Boba Fett gets to walk off with Han Solo's frozen corpse.
So that's one of the things I've never entirely understand. Boba Fett, Lando says the Empire got here before you did.
Right.
So Boba Fett hangs out at Darth Vader's Star Destroyer.
One would imagine somewhere.
Waits until Han does exactly the same thing. When they release the garbage, Han makes a break for it. Boba Fett makes a break following him and somehow figures out how to go to Cloud City first.
Actually, I was thinking about this, and I actually think it makes sense. One, Boba Fett might just do that just because he's a freak and just be like, I'm going to hang out in your trash, and that's how I do my do. Maybe so you can't track me, like you're going to leave first and then I'll leave kind of thing. I mean, he's a bounty hunter. It's a bounty hunter-ish thing to do. My feeling was, having just watched it recently, was that just like Han Solo's sitting there in the Millennium Falcon and he's looking at whatever systems they can get to, and they make clear from the conversation with Leia that it's very slim pickings where they are. And then he sees, Lando, and then he finds there's Cloud City going there. Probably doesn't take much. I don't know what people know. We don't really know what people know and don't know, but there's a clear connection between Lando, the Millennium Falcon, and Han Solo that if someone else were to look at the records of what systems are around here and know anything about Han Solo or any of his deeds or the ship or anything, might be able to put the 2 and 2 together and say, there's this guy Lando. By the way, he used to own the Millennium Falcon. He used to run with Solo, and he's on this direct path because there's not that much there. Because he has light speed, he's then able to just zip ahead of Solo and get there with enough time to set up their trap. That's how I read it, which they don't do anything in the movie with that, but I feel like there's enough pieces in just what we know to be able to say it's reasonable that a bounty hunter with some information could suss out that. And maybe he didn't even do it. Maybe he just told Vader, here's their course, and Vader figured it out.
That's entirely possible. It's not... He doesn't do anything really dramatic. It is more of a clerical move.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't show him do anything. But he does figure that out, which is more than you could say for Bausch, Bosk, IG-88, and whoever else was there.
Forlom and Zuckus.
There you go. He did it. He gets there. That's his one thing he does. Other than that, he just kind of stands around looking tough while Vader disarms Solo.
He does shoot at Leia and Chewbacca when he's making off with...
Yes, he takes a couple of pot shots when he's just trying to get away with his quarry. Doesn't hit anybody, but he accomplishes his goal, we could say, because he wanted to get out of Dodge with his trophy, and he does. to get to Jabba, which is obviously off screen, but we know that's where he's going. Or I don't even know if we know exactly, but we know that Jabba has the bounty on Han, and we know that he's looking after the bounty. So two and two together, he's taking this to Jabba.
Yeah, he's definitely, because that's one of his other lines is he's no good to meet dad.
Right. Jabba wants him alive for whatever reason.
Right.
That takes us to Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, I also wanted to point out one of the other victories of Boba Fett was just the weirdest ship.
It is a cool ship, even the way it flies. You'd think it would fly with that flat iron part on the floor,
right,
facing down, and instead it tilts on the side and it goes that way. And it is a very cool look.
What's nuts is when I was a kid and I had the Kenner toy, you would load the action figure in, and then there was a crank that actually like basically he'd lay back and then it would move him into position in the cockpit.
That's cool.
Like the whole cockpit. But then when Slave One, that's the only time we ever see the interior. We see an interior of Slave One when he's going after Solo and Empire. We don't see Slave One in Return of the Jedi at all.
Right.
We see Slave One when it's taking off from Cloud City, but we don't see how Boba Fett gets into the cockpit.
Correct.
And then we don't see Slave One again until Attack of the Clones.
Right.
Where we see, instead of a one person, it's a two-seater. And you actually have to kind of climb and take off in a laying position.
Right. So, I mean, but the toy, I don't know. Is the toy canon? Is the Kenner
I don't
Slave
know.
One toy canon as far as how it works? I doubt it.
The Millennium Falcon is another case where no matter how many times I've picked up technical specs for the interior of it, they've moved stuff around.
Yeah, I mean, because I doubt that they really worried about that too much at the time.
Yeah.
It's big, it's got tunnel halls in it, and places to store hydro spanners.
Right, but sometimes there's just convenient space. Like it's kind of like there's that room in the Simpsons house that doesn't actually make any sense from the street where it would be.
Right. Well, now we're getting into like room 222 there, room whatever that Shining movie with rooms that make no sense.
Slave One is
an enigma, which we will not solve. But we get to Return of the Jedi. Boba Fett is there. He had handed off Solo to Jabba, but he's still hanging around, I guess, just, I don't know, to look menacing in the background.
Yeah, there seems to be something, like Jabba's got a cult of personality. It's people who love hanging around, sleeping in piles.
Got good music, the food's good, just don't stand on the wrong spot when he decides to move his platform back.
Yes, or be around when he spits frog heads out. And then Boba Fett he's one of the featured characters who's at the ready when
Luke.
I just realized Bausch was Dengar. Dengar was the guy with the head wrap in Empire Strikes Back.
That's been bothering you this whole time.
I was like, that's not Bausch.
Bausch and his partner Loam went back to doing hair products.
No, yeah. Bausch and Loam. Sorry. For those listening who thought I was an idiot, I was an idiot. Dengar is the guy with the giant head bandage who looks like he's wearing...
Looks like a slee stack?
Well, the slee stack that's Bosk.
Right.
Yeah, no. The chest piece that Dengar is wearing is actually... It looks similar to what they designed for Kate's chest, so...
A little Dengar shout-out?
Little Dengar shout-out that he'd repurposed droid parts.
So when Luke puts his daring plan of action to save Solo in motion at the side of the Sarlacc.
When Bausch pulls out the thermal detonator, because negotiations with Jabba aren't going well for Chewbacca.
You're really talking about Princess Leia here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But at that point in the movie, we only know that she is Bausch, the bounty hunter. Boba Fett's the first one who reaches for his gun.
All right. Well, he's always got his gun on him.
There's a dramatic moment. And then they kind of give each other a nod. Like, we're both bounty hunters. It's cool. And then we don't see Boba Fett again until they're above the Great Pit of Carkoon.
Now, he does use the jetpack then. Doesn't he jetpack over to where those guys are? I know he gets knocked off and then the jetpack gets hit and fires off that time. But
he is part... he's on the central sail barge.
But doesn't he jump and fly over to where Luke is?
He's on the central sail barge when Luke gets his lightsaber and starts freeing his friends and taking the fight to Jabba's men. And
by the way, that's got to be the worst actual plan. I mean, that's the plan for people who have no plan. I find it hard to believe that this is the outcome that he was looking for. Granted, it all works out in the end, but man, if that's your first plan,
that considering Leia is functionally the figurehead of the New Republic, that all those people back on Home One would be just fine with a plan that puts her in a situation where she's in serious jeopardy.
Well, I imagine she went AWOL to do that.
Yeah, but even it's irresponsible. But that's part of the fun of Star Wars, is they were all shoot from the hip types. So Boba Fett jumps off of the main barge, uses his jetpack, which was a big thrill because we never got to see him use it. He lands, he uses his grappling hook to wrap it around Luke Skywalker, temporarily making it impossible for him to swing his lightsaber.
And then he gets Three Stooged into the Sarlacc.
Luke cuts free, he slices Boba Fett's gun in half, then he goes back to fighting other people, and then a blind Han Solo, while Chewbacca is trying to fly the skiff so that they can save Lando, who has fallen into the pit of Carkoon and is being dragged down by tendrils. And this might be the only place in the actual movies Chewbacca yells at Han, and Han says, "Boba Fett, where Boba Fett?" And Boba Fett is lining up a shot from his wrist.
And he's got a broom handle or something, and he clips Boba Fett with the broom handle. He's got a big
spear, and he hits Boba Fett's jetpack, which goes off. They use the Willem scream. And Boba Fett in the original movie just kind of hit, and when they did the special editions where they animated a giant
mouth or something,
like an Audrey from Little Shop of Horrors mouth onto it, it snapped him up and belched.
Right. I call that him getting Three Stooges to death, because that's what it felt like watching it. It felt like that to me, and every time I rewatch it, that you have this kind of two things going on: a fun action sequence along with a comedy routine with Han Solo and Chewbacca running a two-man game of "I'm blind," and he's going to tell you where to hit, and then he happens to hit the sweet spot, hits the thing. It's a very ignominious end for this bounty hunter that we had decided in our minds as fans was a very cool character. And they have a history, I think, of doing this with cool characters. I mean, they definitely did it with Maul in the prequels, where I felt like you built up this guy so cool, and then he dies to like the dumbest rookie move I feel like that could be
He had the high ground.
Oh boy. And this is obviously the first time and Jango goes down the same way, which we'll get to as we delve into other Mandalorians, but taking this cool character and having him go down like a dog, it takes the wind, to me it took all the wind out of him as being a cool character, because someone who is that cool and that badass a bounty hunter would not go down like that.
What did he do that made him cool?
It was just a look.
Yeah, that's it.
It was just a look. But I think by the time you get to Jedi, they're well aware that people think he's cool. And it's almost like they do that on purpose. Oh, you think he's cool? Watch this. And then just ruin him. I want to use like a wrestling thing where they talk about someone that they ruin, where they give him a terrible gimmick. They think this guy is doing great, and they saddle him with a horrible gimmick, and then he flames out. And I felt like they just gimmicked his death so that obviously it didn't work as far as most people still thought Boba Fett was cool post Sarlacc, but man, what a letdown. I think everyone will agree that's a super big letdown for this character who we had come to think of as a cool character.
What was the screw job? Screw job was
Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels.
Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, where
they do a really quick tap out to get the title off of him. But that's not a bad gimmick. A bad gimmick would be like his brother when he was like the Blue Blazer, which is a gimmick with like, why are you giving this guy who's a great wrestler a terrible gimmick? Or I remember there was a guy who got the gimmick the Red Rooster. It's just all like you see these people like they're just awful.
I don't necessarily hate the way Boba Fett.
Really? So you're down with that?
The thing is sometimes with a character that is that allegedly that tough and undefeatable, I think about the Leonard Smalls, the guy in Raising Arizona, the lone biker of the apocalypse, and he kicks everyone's butt when he comes along, and nothing seems to take him down, and then he's got all those grenades, and while he's basically crushing Nicolas Cage to death, and Nicolas Cage is just flailing, trying to do everything as he's knocked him senseless, Nicolas Cage accidentally pulls the pin on one of his grenades. And while he's frantically trying to figure out which grenade on him the pin has been pulled from and get his crazy grenade belt off of him, which serves no purpose in the film, he blows up. And it's hilarious. I mean,
right, but what kind of film is Raising Arizona?
Raising Arizona is a slapstick comedy.
Right. Is Return of the Jedi a slapstick comedy?
Boy, there's a lot of it in there.
Yeah, it is, but I I don't think that we would
you
say
have
that.
you have an Ewok riding a spinning.
Absolutely, but going into it, was that your idea of Return of the Jedi?
bike.
I'm going in to see Return of the Jedi, a slapstick comedy. I don't think it was.
I think one of the strengths of Return of the Jedi is that for the most part, you're so engrossed by the high concept stuff that's going on, you sort of gloss over that.
Well, I definitely didn't gloss over it in Boba Fett's case, and it felt out of place.
All right.
And I think in some circumstances that kind of thing works. I think in Raising Arizona it works because it makes sense, because this guy's got this thing on and then using it against him. I don't remember it being totally accidental that he pulls it off the pin, but even if it is, that's to me way different than the lucky shot on the one part of the backpack that's going to set it in motion. Now, keeping in mind, Boba Fett can't reach back there to turn on his jetpack, so you would think he would turn it on from his wrist or somewhere else, not in the middle of his back or wherever he gets hit. It's not something that makes a ton of sense in the fiction. It's really just, I don't know. It just feels to me to be pretty lame across the board. But if you're down with it, it's cool. I'm sure other people are down with it. It doesn't, to me, comparing to Raising Arizona.
I also feel like in that it's Han Solo who does it, and Han has this.
But it's not Han Solo doing a Han Solo-ish thing. It's Han Solo flailing around like an idiot.
I don't think he's flailing around like an idiot.
He's blind. He can't see anything.
Are you...
He's yelling at Chewie.
Han has a habit of hitting things and them suddenly working in those films.
Yes, he does. I will grant you that. I think this is a terrible use of that. If you're going to put in he's using his Force-ish ability to turn stuff on by thwacking it.
It's not Force-ish. I think it's just that's part of the charm of that character is that he's got dumb luck.
I would give it to you if it had even been intentional. In other words, if he had been intentionally put in a similar situation, he's being strangled by Boba Fett, he starts just pressing buttons on Boba Fett's arm band and hits the right button, I would actually be fine with it. Him blinded, just thwacking around with a stick and happens to hit the magic spot, I will never be down with that.
All right.
Never, ever. And so there we thought was the end of Boba Fett, but as we will learn, it was not the end of Boba Fett, but...
Right, and Lucas made it sound like he was going to be done with the trilogy, he was going to be done with the series, so they were fine killing off Jabba and killing off all of the bounty hunters.
Except we have all the extended fiction that's going to come out, or extended universe, whatever the term they use for it.
That's us for wanting it, and
I'm sure that stuff is being written before we actually asked for it. I feel like it's not quite so easy to be we were the chicken to that egg. I think that stuff, it was in development. I think they knew full well that there would be more demand, and they counted on it. And of course, it was there, but I don't think it's fair to say that we were all sitting there crying for more, and they just said, oh, we didn't want to give it to you, but now we will. I think they were ready, willing, and able, and in the process of churning that stuff out before anyone ever looked up and said, well, whatever happened to Boba Fett?
And as somebody who picked up, much like with Aliens and Terminator and Predator, Dark Horse Comics picked up the license for Star Wars and started making other Star Wars stories, one of which was Dark Empire, which took place shortly after the events of Return of the Jedi.
Is that part of the Thrawn trilogy or no?
No, it actually confuses the Thrawn trilogy, because if you were reading both, the canonicity conflicted with the other.
Interesting.
Dark Empire came up with the idea, because this is all before the prequels, so in the Thrawn trilogy, the Sparty cylinders are the things that the cloners used, and the Clone Wars were because the Jedis cloned themselves.
Yeah, I read the first book and a half of Thrawn, but I can't remember. That sounds right.
The Jedis had cloned themselves because there was some intergalactic conflict that there weren't enough Jedis to fight. So the Jedis cloned themselves, but then the problem was that a copy of a Jedi didn't have the Jedi's morals. Most of them went insane and had to be killed off. And the character Jorah Saboeth is actually a clone, but Luke desperately needs to complete his training because neither Yoda nor Obi-Wan Kenobi really gave him the understanding of the Force that he needs to restart the Jedi Order. So he's learning from a clone who is flawed.
Okay. Now, Dark Empire. So that's the Thrawn one, but I don't think I don't think Boba Fett features in Thrawn, or maybe he does. I don't.
He
remember.
doesn't.
He shows up in Dark Empire.
Dark Empire. He shows up on Nar Shaddaa, the smuggler's moon.
Do they have that famous? I think of it famous in my mind. I don't know if there's an actual cell of him clawing his way out of the Sarlacc. Do they actually show that?
He says something to because it's him and it's Dengar and
What about Bausch? And Loam. Bausch and Loam.
So
the perfectly coiffed bounty hunters that may or may not be Princess Leia.
That I called Dengar Bausch.
All right, so he's with Dengar.
He's with Dengar, and they're all me and the boys back together hunting Han Solo, and he says something about I had to shoot my way out of the Sarlacc, and there's fan films where he's in the Sarlacc and he fights his way out, and I think even when Patton Oswalt did that the filibuster on Parks and Recreation, he included a whole thing where Boba Fett shoots his way out in their Slave One. There's also a book called Tales of the Bounty Hunters, where each one of them
I remember hearing about that. I don't think I ever read it.
Goes through their stories, and because there was Tales of the Cantina, and they were anthologies where different authors kind of took their character they liked. And in the Boba Fett one, I remember he has Slave One basically autopilot to him and shoot up the Sarlacc, and then drop a ladder and he climbs out. The idea of Boba Fett surviving was very important to fans, and because he's in this armored suit and he has a multitude of weapons and a rocket pack, the idea, it's not infeasible.
Well, it depends what the inside of the Sarlacc is like, right? If it's like your living room where you have tons of space to move around and contemplate what you're going to do with your day, sure, it makes sense. If you are being wrapped in tentacles and dissolved by acids, then I question how you're getting all this stuff done. It's easy to think about that when you're not being dissolved by a Sarlacc. I know it takes 1,000 years or whatever.
When 3PO says you'll be digested for 1,000
but that's the
years.
whole digestion. Maybe you get through the nice exterior parts.
It also plays off the notion that somebody actually knows when the Sarlacc makes waste.
I think you might be digging a little too deeply in the wrong
Well, I
end
think
of the
you'd have to
Sarlacc
dig
on
pretty
that one.
deep to see the Sarlacc's waste.
Anyway, it was one of those things I think would have worked better for me. Not that I mind it per se, but if it had been something like, I guess they didn't really do this then, but a post-credit sequence. They've had the celebration, they fade to black, and then at the end they'd cut back to the Sarlacc. You see Boba Fett's arm and pulling him out. That would have been a really cool thing, but they didn't do that. But probably didn't think about it. Probably wasn't in their concerns to resurrect Boba Fett, but of course it didn't matter because other people resurrected him for them, and I assume that everything got signed off on by Lucas and whoever else, so that if Boba Fett did get to exit the Sarlacc, that was at least tacitly approved by Lucas and whoever else was going over all the extended universe stories.
Yes.
So he's back. So what else does he do in Dark Embers? He's back after Han Solo.
He makes a bunch of swings at Solo. He has a ship called Slave 2.
Of course.
Which wasn't nearly as cool the way they drew it. And then they came up with both pre-Empire or Jedi stories. I don't remember a lot of stories. Dark Empire isn't that good. It's almost ridiculous in that Palpatine has hundreds of clones.
Well, that's the one where he's got a warehouse full of clones.
Warehouse full of clones, and they're all young and hot, and then Force ages him rapidly, so he's constantly winding up crazy shriveled old man.
Not because he's grinding out Mace Windu lightning bolts.
No, which, again, really upset me when it happened in the movie, but that's probably a different podcast.
Well, we're going to get to the prequels, because the prequels are going to throw another wrench in the Boba Fett works, but
there's also the thing, in the Marvel comics, they refer to... Marvel was the first company to do comics for Star Wars, and they refer to Boba Fett as a Mandalorian.
Okay, so we should get into that. So when does this come out? Is now between Empire and Jedi? Is this after Jedi?
I want to say this is part where I didn't do my homework on time, but I think it happened after Jedi.
So this is when we get into not only Boba Fett, but now building out the lore of him as not just a unique specimen, but one of many who we presume have similar traits.
Right.
Which is
the Mandalorians are a fierce warrior race. And then I remember something where they started referring to him as last of the Mandalorian bounty hunters.
Not the Mohicans, but the Mandalorians.
And just as by throwing the scraps from the IG-88 prop in the corner, espoused all this fan fiction about Boba Fett and IG-88 having a massive battle on Cloud City, or in some versions it's a refinery planet called Ord Mantell. People started coming up with who are the Mandalorians, what happened to them, and why is Boba Fett the last of them.
All right, so let's get into that. Who are the Mandalorians, and what did happen to them? Or at least, at this point, do we know? Did the comics get into it? Because I know that the animated series, which are going to come after the prequels, get into Mandalorian history. But what do we know at this point? Okay, so Mandalorian, where do you come from? So who are the Mandalorians, and what do they want? Where are they from? I guess it's a place called Mandalore. Is that correct? Have I got the whole planet?
Yes.
Not Mandaloria, not Mando.
It's Mandalore, and Mandalore at one point was the name of the leader of the race as well, the Mandalore.
Mandalore from Mandalore, head of the Mandalorians.
Mandalore of Mandalore.
All right, so when does this all come out? So I think we want to go, we don't want to get to the cartoon animated stuff before we do the prequels. So if you can separate what the original comic runs and say Dark Empire, etc., what did they say about Mandalore? If not, we can merge it all together.
Marvel just said that they were a warrior race.
So nothing really about their organization or their planet or their...
Not really.
Okay.
Some of this gets fleshed out in the role-playing game source books, which I didn't read. I didn't play the games.
I have the West End games, which I think is one of the earlier Star Wars ones, but I didn't think to look at it for what they say about Mandalorians, but I don't know when that came out. I don't know when it came out in relation to these other things.
And then there's that crazy skull, the big monster skull that Boba Fett has on his patch, and if you watch the pilot for The Mandalorian, there's a big silver version of it up on the wall, and that's supposed to be this badass creature
that they rode in times past. You can ride this human-faced mouse giant creature because you used to ride this crazy dinosaur.
I think it's kind of a questing beast.
A vision questing beast?
The idea is the Mandalorians they're super tough. They're Spartans.
They are the Klingons of the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, in some media. In others, they're almost entirely a race of mercs. And I remember when, I don't want to jump around too much, but we don't see.
All right, so maybe we should get into the prequels, which actually don't say anything about Mandalore or Mandalorians at all. But what we do find out, which I think we can talk about because it goes against what little we had found out prior, is that we learn or we discover that Boba Fett is the clone in child form of another Mandalorian called Jango Fett.
Right. And all this is disappointing. On top of reading Boba Fett in two video games that Boba Fett showed up in, one was the platform jumper Shadows of the Empire on the N64, and I fought him as Dash Rendar, Han Solo's good buddy. And Shadows of the Empire is entirely a boondoggle about trying to stop Boba Fett from delivering Han Solo to Jabba.
It's the whole game about your failure to stop Boba Fett.
Well, they wind up coming up against a new big bad, and Prince Shizor, or Zizor, or whatever, his name began.
Great Shizor's ghost!
His name began with an X. He had big fans for weapons.
Oh, he's like one of those kung fu fan fighters?
Yeah, they were like energy fans,
oh,
so
okay.
You could fight a lightsaber with it.
Of course.
Silly stuff.
Yes. So anyway,
I fought Boba Fett in that, and I fought Boba Fett in Dark Forces, which was a Star Wars Doom-style game. It was a first-person shooter.
So you fought the Fett, and the Fett won, but they don't say much about where he came from.
He always gets just blasted enough that he gets out of there.
But I mean, my point being is, do they tell you anything about his story?
No, he is a formidable boss.
So what does him turning out to be a clone of another Mandalorian do to his legacy in your eyes as someone who was profoundly disappointed by it?
I was profoundly disappointed because from my perspective, they robbed him of a lot of the mystery of his backstory.
But didn't they just replace it with the mystery of Jango Fett's backstory?
Well, they did stuff to that too. So Jango Fett shows up in Attack of the Clones as a bounty hunter who has been tasked with killing Princess Amidala.
Tries a space snake of some sort.
Well, first we think he's responsible for the
blowing
bombing.
Up. Okay, the bombing, then the space snake.
Then he
hires... Or actually, I guess he sublets that
He
later.
hires the changeling Zam Wessel.
Well, you got all these names down. They're terrible names, but to your credit, you've memorized them all.
Who uses... He gives her snakes that she puts in a droid. The droid puts the snakes into the bedroom. That doesn't do it. Then she's buildings away watching with a sniper rifle. She doesn't hit anybody. There's a huge chase.
A very long chase.
Because George Lucas wanted to show us what digital effects could do. And I think that was 2002, right?
Sure.
2003 maybe. But then...
I always like to think of those little ships they're driving in are powered by Brian May's guitar, because they have those little kind of space twangs as
that's right.
Flying around Coruscant.
Sam Speeder made that. Yeah.
But yeah, so they find Zam, who
they
Boba
finally
Fett
get her.
kills.
Obi-Wan chops off her arm in a bar. They drag her outside, and
no
Boba
death sticks. Remember that, kids. Don't eat, smoke,
you don't
or
want to sell me
ingest death sticks.
You want to change her.
But out in the street, they get her, but not before Jango.
Jango shoots her and then effectively uses his rocket pack to fly away.
The only effective use of his rocket pack we will ever see.
And it looks really cool in that moment. But he leaves behind the thing he uses to kill her with is a Kamino saber dart.
But I think it's intentional because he needs them. The whole plot really centers on them getting to Kamino. Their plan doesn't work if the Jedi never figure out that the clones are there. That is part of their whole plan.
I hate that movie because it's entirely predicated on everyone screwing up.
It's not a screw-up that they're able to track down the dart. They have to make smart moves to get there.
He doesn't look like he was expecting Obi-Wan Kenobi when Obi-Wan shows up.
He might not have been, but he might have been thinking on his feet. He is Jango Fett, after all. Master bounty hunter.
But if you're going to leave a massive clue like that as to where you're using a weapon that can only be fabricated one place in the entire universe.
But you might have 10 of them. Like you might have wanted to shoot Obi-Wan with it or someone else with it instead and leave it that way. You just decide to up your plan by shooting Zam. Like he could have had that in his back pocket. He was just going to use it. Maybe what she shot what she was going to shoot Amidala with was going to be that same dart, right? We don't know what his other backups were.
I don't even understand why he subcontracted the hit.
No, that makes no sense. Other than he needs to get away and maybe figure.
And it's the worst hit ever because he gives her the snakes to put in a droid.
Well, she decides to put them in the droid. That's her mistake. Jango might have said, here's some snakes that'll do the job. And I can see them want to use the snakes because you have to be careful because you have Jedi there. And the Jedi reading the room, the snakes are just animals. Maybe they get underneath their force radar. Of course, you also get away from it if you're 5 blocks away using a high-powered sniper rifle, but that's beyond.
I feel dumber for just having this conversation. And it
could be that he knows the gravitivity and the polarity, and that is why he does the things he does. But it is not a smart movie.
It's not a smart movie. Obi-Wan Kenobi tracks the saber dart back to exactly the only place it can be made.
Which they need him to, right?
Where Jango Fett is just chilling out.
But theoretically, that's exactly what they need.
He's like getting out of the shower or something when...
But Obi-Wan doesn't fight him. It's until the end. It's only when he tries to, looks like he's getting away.
Obi-Wan sees the armor in the closet. Because he says something in, I'm assuming Mandalorian, to Boba Fett, his cloned son. And
at that point, it's just his clone. It's not his cloned son. It's his clone.
I thought Lama Su said something, the Kamino cloner Lama Su, said something to the effect of the only payment Jango asked for being the source
material.
Star
of Lama Su got married.
Lama Su got married.
The Dalai
to be the source material for the clone army and to train the clones.
And to get a clone in child form.
The only thing he asked for was one clone of himself that he could raise as his son.
But that's not his son. That's him. It's a clone. It's not his cloned son. They didn't take his son and clone the son. It's him cloned as a child who he is calling a son.
If you cloned yourself, Todd, and...
I would call it mini-me, like Dr. Evil. That is the correct term. Mini-me.
Had that clone...
I may call him my son.
20 years younger than you.
But he is not in reality my son.
How would you regard it that?
No, you could call it your son, but it's not actually your son. I might call it a weasel. I might call it something else. It's a clone. In any case, young Boba's there, escapes with Daddy.
Young Boba's there, and even though Jango should have anticipated that the Jedis were going to follow him after he used a device that can...
But remember, that's also part of the grand plan. See, these aren't mistakes, because these are the things that Palpatine and these people are counting on them doing so that he can initiate his grand war so that he can then initiate his takeover of the Senate to get war powers. So all these things are things that they actually anticipated. Whether you believe it or not, that's the idea, is that he has set all the stuff up. He is churning the pot. He's doing all the stuff. So he is making sure they do get to these places because he has to have them need the clone army, which means they have to have a war going. And to precipitate the war, he has to be able to get a flashpoint started. He needs his Sarajevo 1914 event, and that is the handful of Jedi being stuck on the Trade Federation planet, about to have their midriff closed ripped open so you can see their belly buttons by a bunch of dangerous cat beasts, forcing Yoda's hand to need an army behind them. And they need to have an army to call upon, so they get the clones. They need to have something to use it, so they get the Trade Federation, and then Palpatine set up. So by that logic,
dumb.
It's all according to Palpatine's plans.
It's dumb.
It is dumb.
It's really dumb.
But Jango plays his part and plays it well.
And Jango, none of that makes me think Jango's good at his job.
He did exactly what he was paid to do, except when he decides to run straight at Mace Windu and just get cut down like a punk.
Because Jango, rather than engage Obi-Wan Kenobi... in combat, he decides to make a break for it.
Yeah, which is smart. And what he needed to do to get the
but then
Jedi to that other place.
He spends the entire time trying to kill Obi-Wan once he makes it out to the platform.
Well, I think you could argue, was he, or was he just trying to, put down a smoke screen, put down just some fire to get out of dodge?
I'm thinking, he launched a missile at him. He had...
He knew he was a Jedi.
All right. So then he anticipate.
You got to make it look good.
This is frustrating because then he actually drops mines in an asteroid belt,
and they call it a mine. Well, that whole chase I hate because it just diminishes the Han Solo. It seems like after Han Solo did a asteroid field, everybody and their uncle's got to do some kind of asteroid field, but I think he had to make it look good. He couldn't be too bold or too clear. He couldn't be too transparent with his scheme. And the scheme is to make you think you don't want them to chase you, and so they chase you. If they think that you're leading them by the nose, it's going to turn on their danger senses. So I think you could read that. Now, look, I'm not trying to argue this is actually good, but you could read it as he's doing exactly what he's supposed to do, much like in Cloud City when Vader just tortures Han without asking him any questions because that's going to set off Luke. On a whole other planet, Luke's going to feel that and then come running. I think you have to make it look real. You have to really kind of put them in danger because otherwise the Jedi will not follow you. So by the logic this movie is set up, Jango does exactly what he's supposed to and gets the Jedi precisely where they are supposed to be for all these plans, for Dooku and all that stuff to happen. And then we get to the arena.
And then, we get to Jango helps capture Padme and...
Open the Padme doors, Hal.
Anakin, while they're trying to rescue Obi-Wan Kenobi. We're treated to another big arena fight where...
Is it really a treat? Is that what we're calling it?
Beasties are supposed to kill our main protagonists. And there's this weird sort of fun grandpa vibe between Count Dooku and Boba Fett. This is fun. And that part of that was diminishing for me. No knock to Daniel Logan. I don't think Lucas wrote any of the kids very well in the prequels. But he's way too this is going to be fun. Go get him, Dad.
Well, it's the Annie syndrome, right? The kid's kind of yippee, but he's doing it, Mandalore style.
Yeah, it's just they could have good sunned him. They really could have made him sinister.
Yeah, or wearing a small version of the helmet. That might have been something.
So
with a little
speaking
jetpack.
of the helmet, there is the.
Or are you're not cutting over Mace's glory moment?
So at a point when things look dire for everybody in the arena, Mace Windu shows up and puts a lightsaber to Dooku's throat or Jango's throat.
Is it Jango's throat? I mean, Jango does a cool move, I think, to get away from Mace. Is it from there, from the owner's box?
He sets him on fire. He uses the flamethrower on his wrist to set Mace on fire because Mace has to ditch his cloak while he does this really kind of. But
then, Jango's jetpack gets messed up. Gets hit by an animal.
One of the animals that's kind of rhino-esque.
Of course, takes out the jetpack.
Tramples Jango. His jetpack goes flying because he throws on the gear and goes straight after Mace. Right. He's got an axe to grind against the Jedi.
What frustrates me with that is that we know some things about Jedi. Number one, maybe above all, is if you're running at a Jedi and they've got their lightsaber and you start firing blasters at them, it's going right back at you.
Which Mace doesn't do. He doesn't bounce a single shot back.
What is
he just deflects all of
it. Yeah, but then you're running at the guy with the lightsaber. It seems to be a poor move.
Does he run at him, or does he?
Well, I don't know. There's a shot of him running across that arena. I assume he's not running somewhere else. I assume he's running at Mace.
I thought, and I'll go back and watch it, but I thought he gets up and he starts shooting at Mace, and Mace is closing in on him.
I thought he was running,
because
Mace could be closing in on him.
What was so weird about the climax of that is that Mace decapitates him.
Right. But he does nothing to play to his strengths. He does everything. It seems like he just willfully puts himself in the spot to be Jedi'd, when I would have thought that a guy with his wile and guile would have made it difficult.
Obviously, he's out of commune of saber darts, and he...
It's kind of like he just had those tricks, and once he ran out of those tricks, that was it. He was ordinary. Not even... he really just had no clue. Not trying to get one of the beasts to do his dirty work for him, not trying to ride on one of those, not trying to get out or get a different vantage, or you do something. He really just kind of stands there. I thought he was running, but maybe not. But in any case, he doesn't try to get away or get to a better position than being near the guy with a laser sword who is intent on killing you.
But that's just the thing is, I don't think Mace was, because the minute he cuts his head off, he looks sad, and he looks up to Boba Fett.
But he still cut the head off. He had choices. It wasn't reflex. It wasn't some weird twist. You don't slice somebody's head from their shoulders like that and not know you're doing it.
So he...
But in any case, Jango is gone.
Jango dies.
And there's a famous,
There's a moment where Boba Fett at the...
somehow got down to the helmet and then is cradling it.
And he's holding it, but technically... This is the weird thing, is like we don't know what actually seals a stormtrooper or a Mandalorian in their helmet, because it come rolling out of there.
Well, it's tight fitting.
Okay.
I don't know enough about head decapitations. I guess if it's a decapitation, I guess it already means it's a head. I don't know enough about decapitations to say what should happen to a helmeted head that comes free.
I don't either.
But yes, we presume the head is still inside the helmet when Boba is holding it, looking at it, and then that's all we see of baby Boba. I think.
Unless you watch the Clone Wars cartoon.
Right, well, now you can tell me. So, that is Jedi. We leave that. We've learned a little bit more about Boba Fett. We may not have wanted to know that more about Boba Fett, but now we know he is a clone of Jango Fett. But we don't know anything else really about Jango Fett other than his last name is Fett, and he is from some place called Mandalore.
Unless, like me, you bought the Dark Horse comic series that came out immediately after Attack Clones.
All right, so what happens in the...
There was a really good comic book series called Open Seasons that explained, and that's more where the Mandalorians are diminished as a race. There aren't that many of them left. Jango and another Mandalorian bounty hunter named Montross are...
You were the shite and the flies upon it, Montross.
They were the apprentices of Jaster Muriel.
Jango, Jaster.
Yeah, and...
Do we get Jingle?
There is a conflict that the Jedis insert themselves into that pretty much ends up with most of the Mandalorians, including Jaster, being wiped out.
All right. Is that what alluded to in The Mandalorian in the flashbacks, which we'll get to? Sorry, the spoilers for The Mandalorian. They flash back to him, some kind of massacre situation. Is that implied that that's the same?
So having watched the trailer for The Mandalorian and then watching the first episode of The Mandalorian where it helped me understand scenes I saw in the trailer more, there was when he's flashing back to what I assume is his childhood, he's the kid in the box.
I mean, that's my guess.
Matching that up with the shots of the couple in red running with that kid down the street where they are being chased by super battle droids, I'm thinking that the Mandalorian was a victim of the war. The war that the Jedi inserted themselves into? I'm not saying, is this the same? The Clone Wars. The Clone Wars, okay. If they're running from Trade Federation droids, it has to be the Clone Wars. Does it? I don't know. I don't know if they're the only ones that made those droids, if they don't exist after the Trade Federation is no longer a thing. I don't know. Well, there was an episode of Rebels where... Okay, well, so let's get into the comics and the stuff. So in this comic book, post-Clone Wars, Jango is sold into slavery, and he has to fight his way back, and... A la Conan. And when he when this battle happened, Jango's armor looked like Boba Fett's. And when he finally liberates himself and gets out in the world and he's building himself back up, he finds the guy who bought his armor, and the guy he has it on display and he's scrubbed off all of the paint. So the idea is that down the line, Boba Fett restores the armor to the paint.
Its cruddy state that it was?
The paint job it's supposed to have.
Okay. But so it's not a Beskar steel situation. Because I thought maybe, again, spoilers for The Mandalorian. I'm not going to say it again. So if you haven't seen The Mandalorian, probably see it and then come back to this because we're going to start mixing that stuff in. I thought maybe, having seen the whole Beskar steel connection, that Jango's armor was basically completed set of Beskar armor.
Retroactively, I'm sure it is. Back in 2003, 2002, when Clone Wars came out, we didn't have...
Okay.
That wasn't there.
All right, so what else do we learn? So there's some kind of massacre.
There was a massacre, and in the comic book series, what's even more informing of the characters is that Dooku is there, and he's upset because so many lives are lost, and this is the conflict that starts thinking that maybe the Jedi's don't have it figured out, that there has to be another way that starts him down that dark path. But in addition to the comic book series, which did a nice job of taking you through Jango's life and him having to pull himself back up, and then Dooku reaching out to him as you and I are both at this thing, I want to give you the opportunity to be part of the instrument that restores order to the galaxy. As one of the last Mandalorians, I want one clone who will be my son. So I have a pure Mandalorian son. And I like that. I also played the PlayStation 2 game Jango Fett Bounty Hunter that also had the character Montross in it. And the idea in that, which conflicted with the comic book, was that Dooku has his own Sith apprentice, and she's gone rogue, and she's taken over this gang that deals in like
death sticks.
Death sticks, yeah. The Bando Gora, and he needs her taken care of, and he says that whoever gets this bounty will get to be the source template for this clone army. And so Jango and Montross are neck and neck to get this. And there were some fun things introduced in there. Like one of the things that you could harness in the game was your Mandalorian rage, which was kind of like when Riddick goes full Furion in Chronicles of Riddick.
I mean, it sounds a lot like the Furions and Mandalorians are kind of cut from the same cloth.
Right.
For good or ill.
Which is another hoplite thing.
Yes. All right, so we have Jango. Now they're fleshing out his story, how he gets his clone and gets in the position of being cloned for the clone troopers, and I guess presumably the stormtroopers. Did they ever straighten that out, whether they were clones? I mean, I guess in the newer movies they're not clones, because otherwise, what's his name would look like Jango and not look like his own self.
So the stormtroopers are not clones. One of the things that they get into in the Clone Wars in Rebels is that by accelerating their age so that they could be full-grown adults,
they age quickly.
Many of them age quickly. Some of them don't age well at all. And
Wyatt, I'm in my prime.
And they're
okay.
But the Clone Wars cartoon went a step further by saying that an actual Mandalorian tells our heroes that Jango Fett wasn't actually a Mandalorian.
Bum, bum, bum.
And neither is Boba Fett. So the clones aren't Mandalorians.
Okay, and the reason they're not Mandalorian is what they're not.
He just says that Jango Fett was a bounty hunter who either stole or acquired a perfect Mandalorian suit of armor.
So he literally is not from Mandalore. As opposed to, like, he's not a true Scotsman kind of thing, where he is actually from there, but he's done some faux pas to where they don't consider him a true Mandalorian anymore.
Biologically, the show inferred that he is in no way Mandalorian. He could be Corellian for all we know, like Han Solo.
Okay, and this is canon, right? Because
this is canon.
These are canon.
This is canon, but it's also Star Wars, where people's heritage.
All right, so theoretically, they might not even be Mandalorian, but they're there still. And so what happens to... We obviously know the end result of Jango.
So in the
what
series,
happens to Boba?
In the series, Boba Fett turns up repeatedly as a child, trying to exact his revenge on Anakin and Obi-Wan for the role they played. Yeah.
Not successfully, obviously.
And he meets Bosk, and he meets...
what about Bausch?
Or
and
Singh. I don't think there's any Loam. And...
maybe that's why his hair is
if
so
you were
nice
a better
and child.
friend, you'd go back and you'd change it so I said Dengar instead of Bausch when you're editing this.
Ain't that kind of friend? Ain't gonna happen.
All right.
I'm gonna add reverb to Bausch so it stands out.
Bausch.
Yeah, so Boba goes on some child adventures.
And he eventually reclaims Slave One because Hondo has it. Hondo being one of the regular...
Hondo Galarissian?
I think it's Hondo Oka.
Okay.
He's a Klatooinian. Or
is that next to Barata?
Or is he Weequay? Oh, darn it.
In the Nikto sector?
He's one of the races introduced in Jabba's palace. And
is he the one with the meat hair? Because that's the only one I care about out of Jabba's palace.
The meat hair?
Yeah, he's got the big, nice meat hair braid.
Oh, you're talking about Bib Fortuna, who is a male Twi'lek.
Oh, I guess that. So then that's a male Twi'lek. I never knew that.
That's a male Twi'lek.
I just remember the meat hair.
Yeah, that's Bib Fortuna is a male Twi'lek, and as Ula, the poor dancing girl.
So who else comes out in Jedi? Well, you got the pig-faced goons,
the Gamorreans,
and then there's the little giggling rat thing,
Salacious Crumb,
and I don't know who's left. I'm sure there's somebody in the back.
There was Efont Man. There were the Bomar monks, the big spider things with the brain in the jar.
All right. So Clone Wars, we've got young Boba going on adventures. Jango's already gone.
I don't think the series got into. He had an armor type suit that looked more like the Ralph McQuarrie drawing.
Young Boba.
Yeah, it was reddish, but it had. The helmet was more similar to what Ralph McQuarrie drew rather than...
Okay, so basically, I guess we can say that the cartoons, the animated series...
But the cartoons introduced the Mandalores as a proper race.
And they have other Mandalorian characters, right? Don't they go to Mandalore several times?
Yeah, and there were clan wars, and then Darth Maul seizes control of their entire empire, well, their armies. And he creates the Death Watch, and there's a story of a Jedi who was Mandalorian who made this crazy lightsaber that was called the Darksaber that looks cool as all get out. And
now one of the theories about this last Star Wars movie coming out next month is that the Darksaber will factor into that, right? Isn't that one of the crazy conspiracy theories that they're going to be chasing essentially a Darksaber or some kind of
No. There's a black dagger that in the trailer, if you see the part where it
nothing at all like a Darksaber, a black dagger.
Yeah, there's this black dagger that in that shot where Rey and Kylo Ren are fighting in what appears to be an all-white room, and they shatter something that maybe it's the Darth Vader helmet.
Maybe it's my sanity.
Yeah, Rey is holding some sort of black dagger, and I don't think it's the Darksaber.
Okay. So now we've filled up basically everything from Jango and Boba from their beginnings that we know about to their individual demises. We've learned from the cartoons.
And I don't think Boba Fett's dead.
Okay, so
I don't think Boba Fett's dead, right. And I would not be surprised if The Mandalorian, either Daniel Logan, who played young Boba Fett in Attack of the Clones.
I mean, I hope not, but...
Or Tamura Morrison shows up.
It's hard to say no. But anyway, I just wanted... So we'll get into the Mandalorian. So I just wanted to say, we've brought up to date, we've got through the Attack of the Clones, and then into the Clone Wars and Rebels. At least Jango Fett's arc is pretty much completely full, and we've got essentially the intertissue in between Boba Fett's... Or before Boba Fett became the Boba Fett of Empire.
There's still plenty of Boba Fett to be told.
No, I'm not getting around. I'm just trying to say what the source material we've gotten through. I'm just trying to remember where we are. So now...
There was a video game called, right before they shuttered LucasArts, the video game company portion of his empire. There had been a game that they were showing scenes from that was going to turn out to actually be a Boba Fett game where you had to go to a super prison called Level 1313.
Not to be confused with Butcher Bay, where Riddick had to escape from. But at any rate, as far as stuff that actually got out, media was created. So we've gotten
Some of the
up
best
until,
ideas are repurposed.
So we've gotten Boba Fett to the Sarlacc. We've gotten Jango from, I guess, may or may not be an actual Mandalorian, to getting a cloned son, to getting ganked. We've gone through the prequels. We've gone through the animated series. Now we get to the newer films with Abrams, which I don't think say anything one way or the other. We don't run into any Mandalorians of any note.
In the movies so far, the only thing I saw was when they were in... I'm embarrassed. Paul Bettany's character in Solo.
Sure. Paul Bettany's character in Solo.
When they're...
Loam.
Yes. When they're in his kind of trophy room, having their meetings, and then the big fight at the climax of the movie, he's got a Mandalorian armor suit in the background.
Is it just a generic one, or is it one that
we
we
never
associate?
get a clear look at it?
Okay, so we don't know whether it's like a Boba Fett style suit or Jango Fett style suit.
It's definitely, it has the rangefinder, it has the pauldrons, so I'm guessing that was there as some sort of an Easter egg nod. That
it's a Solo movie, so have Boba Fett always seems to be the kind of counterpart, the other side of the coin to Solo, so it makes sense from that standpoint. Okay, so now we get to this latest offering that's newly onto Disney Plus. As we're recording this, there's just the one episode that's up in the trailer. We've already spoiled it a little bit. We're not going to spoil it a ton. Not that much happens in it anyway to be spoiled, but The Mandalorian.
Dryden Voss, that was his name.
Right, that was just killing you. It was
killing
him not to know the name. So we get to The Mandalorian. This, of course, is going to have a lot about Mandalorians and their bounty hunting ways, because that is the title of the show, and that is what it is about. It seems like they've, I don't know if rolled back.
There was a Mandalorian character on the show Rebels as well. Okay. She was one of the protagonists. Her name was Sabine Wren.
Wasn't she heir to the throne of Mandalore?
She was, royal family? And for a while she had the Darksaber herself, and she was a lens into the best of what the Mandalorians could be.
He was the best of us, or she was the best of us.
Yes, Sabine was great.
And then Joker turned her, and now she's somebody else.
She's one of the characters that survives. Spoilers for Rebels. I'm sorry. Which I found slightly frustrating, because in the flash forward at the climax of the series, she's still around after Return of the Jedi, as is Hera Syndulla and Ahsoka Tano. So for some reason, these really awesome characters never showed up to help Luke or Han.
They were busy doing other things.
I guess so.
But now in The Mandalorian, I was going to say, before we got on that little sidetrack, that I don't know if rolled back is the right word, but they seem to have maybe rewritten a little bit of what Mandalorians are like. The big example being that they don't take off their helmets, because I believe, at least in Rebels and those things, you see plenty of Mandalorians just waving their beautiful Mandalorian hair in the breeze. They're not constantly underneath helmets, whereas the Mandalorians that we see in The Mandalorian are all underneath their helmets, even when, like, they're in their little Mandalore Bay bar where it's only Mandalorians are in there. You'd think if there was anywhere they'd feel free to de-helmet to play their 4D chess, it would be in there, and they don't.
Well, once they introduced Jango Fett, Tamura Morrison spends a very large part of that film with his helmet on, to the point where, because all the clones look like him, in some media that later used Boba Fett's taking off his helmet. He looks like Tamura Morrison. He just has a scar.
Sure.
And
but it seems like they're rolling that back, because whereas it didn't seem like they had a big deal about not wearing your helmet, they may even make a point of it when Horatio Sands' fish guy, even makes mention of it. Oh, so you guys never take off your helmets, do you? Which is clearly making a point of telling us, the audience and everything else, that these guys are known for not taking off their helmets.
And I'm curious to see where that goes, because in the series, and again, we've spoiler warned this, while we start off with the Mandalorian going out and claiming a bounty, and Mandalorians seem to be mysterious now in the galaxy. People haven't seen them, they haven't met them, they're intrigued by when Mandalorians show up.
I mean, it's hard to say, right? Because the first place he goes is some kind of weird outpost, and who knows what they've seen when they get
to... But they immediately identify him. And they want to sort of
how is he not? I mean, they're so identifiable, but maybe they haven't seen him. Whereas you get to I don't want to call it the big city, because it's not. It's kind of like it just seems like a village. But when they get to that meeting with that character, I don't know if he's supposed to work for the Empire or whatever. He clearly knows stuff about...
Are we talking about Werner Herzog's character?
He clearly knows stuff about Mandalorians.
He might be like a governor. I mean, he's got clout, and he knows stuff. He's got a big chain with the Imperial symbol on it.
But I mean, he's clearly not awed. He's clearly not like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen him before. And of course, in that village, and it's not like Coruscant or somewhere. It's not some giant city. There's basically a Mandalorian bar you could go into to pick up Mandalorians who all basically were sitting in the dark looking awfully depressed. The ones that are there. There's not a lot of excitement going on in the Mandalore bar and grill.
Well, and I wondered why, if there are so many Mandalorians who seem to have superior armor to his.
I mean, that scene is so dark, I can't say that they have superior armor.
But they have, like, for example, Boba and Jango had the iconic rangefinder, that little antenna thing that would come down and help him see things from far away over his mask. The Mandalorian doesn't have one of those. I actually like that a lot because I think I like how stripped down things are. In the first episode, he gets paid in Beskar steel.
Yeah, I like the Beskar steel.
And so he's earning his armor.
And if you haven't seen it, or if you don't care, the Beskar steel is the steel that at least the idealized version of Mandalorian armor is made from. Clearly they make it with other stuff, but when they can get a piece, when they find some cache of this Beskar steel, they will go to some forge master who will make that into a piece for their armor, and it's silver and it's bright, and they plug that in. Presumably if you saw someone in a full silver suit, silver looking suit, shiny like the moon, you would imagine that they have a high status because they will have had, or they will be wearing a full suit of Beskar steel. And you were saying that Beskar steel is unusual because it can deflect lightsabers or blasters.
It can deflect lightsabers. It soaks up blasters.
So it makes up for the fact that it's bright as all get out with the fact that it has deflective properties.
And it's inferred in the pilot that Palpatine seized all the Beskar steel.
Well, it's got an Imperial seal on the what would you call that? A brick?
Yeah, it's definitely...
Did they call it a brick? They called it a card? What do they I thought they had a term for it, but I'm not...
Yeah,
or maybe they didn't. Maybe they say it's Beskar. And anyway, he has a little brick, I don't know, what would they call it? Gold?
An ingot.
Gold ingot.
It's like an ingot of Beskar steel.
And so that's when he uses that, and he gets that as a down payment, and then he's able to turn that into a pauldron, which actually gets shot a lot. I thought that was something that was kind of funny. He keeps getting shot in the shoulder, so maybe it's good that they made that a pauldron to help. I mean, they really have, just as an aside, they seem to have really downgraded the fatal qualities of blaster shots, because you go from the originally where you got shot with a blaster, if you got shot, you were dead. There was no getting up from it, to taking stomach shots.
Yeah, like Stormtrooper armor is terrible.
Stormtrooper armor never does anything. I think the Mandalorian gets shot at least maybe once or twice. I think both times he's hit in the shoulder. And there's at least one where he gets tagged in the shoulder. It doesn't really even slow him down. And that's I think, Beskar steel shoulder. Maybe it's...
He definitely gets shot by IG-11 in the shoulder.
Yeah, but then I guess he would already have the Beskar steel plate.
But he gets shot in the opening, too.
So, anyway, it's just interesting how they downgraded how deadly blaster shots are. Because they went from being just, you get shot, you're dead, to... Yeah. You can get shot, you can keep going. At least if you have some of that plot armor, which I guess is rarer than Beskar steel, plot steel, then you can take a gut shot and other shots and still function at least for a while. But I think what's interesting, I guess, is that they're going back and they're making them more mysterious. I think they were always at least somewhat unusual.
And mystery's good. I like not knowing.
But do you wonder if that means that they are going to change a lot of the stuff that you had learned in things like Rebels? Because the whole setup they have where you're on their homeworld and getting involved doesn't really match with a tribe that seems to be very secretive with their traditions and their inner workings.
In that, Dave Filoni, who is involved in Clone Wars and Rebels, directed the first episode of The Mandalorian, and Lucasfilm has a story group that's entire job is to make sure continuity is maintained, and because Clone Wars and Rebels are in canon, I think all that stuff's going to stick.
Or is it something that's going to be a change that happened since the events?
I think since this takes place 5 years after Return of the Jedi, and Rebels ends before New Hope. Luke is he's barely a teenager in New Hope, in Rebels. And the Empire had plenty of time to do horrible things to different races. I don't even know whatever happened to the Gungans.
Do you want to know what happened to the Gun
I kind of do. I want to know what happened to the Gun Guns.
President Binks?
I want to know what happened to the Naboo. I would like to know what... I know that in Rebels, the bug race from Attack of the Clones.
Oh, yeah, they got wiped out, right? Don't they go to that planet and it's a whole mystery?
Basically,
I remember
after using that planet to build the Death Star, they think they scorched Earth.
But there were still some left in some deep holes.
Yeah, they'd used biological warfare against them. Something. It was... Anyhow.
You want to know what happened to Watto? Whatever crossed your mind? Whatever happened to good old Watto?
I don't think things worked out well for Watto. He was not doing good when Anakin found him in Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, but he's still alive.
Toydarians. They showed up on the cartoon.
So I guess the idea we think is that they're going to square away these different versions of Mandalorians together. 5 years seems an awful short time though to have totally different cultural worldviews.
But it could be something like 10 to 15 years, and I think
even that I think is not that they won't do it because it's
it's 5 years after Return of the Jedi, but it's 10 to 15 years.
I know, but even 10 to 15 years is not going to
Rebels.
change your whole society from one that is...
Think about how Sarajevo looked when they did the Olympics there.
Are you going to compare... But they're not drastically different peoples.
No,
We're talking about people going from being one way to being a potentially very different way.
I'm saying war can drastically devastate a place and a people.
But that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you're going from a clan-based, yes, but not with this, seemed to me, highly dramatic sense of culture. The very ritualistic things with the way they handle the steel, even the words they use, and the very ritualistic way that when he goes to that the guy, the blacksmith to make it, Forger has a very real ritualistic sense. How you're doing things, the fact they keep the helmets on all the time. There's none of that in Clone Wars version. Yes, it's still there's clans. They don't even call them clans; they call it tribes.
I think that's accurate. Wait, a forger is supposed to be false documents, right?
Well, I assume that because they run a forge, you could probably forger too. I don't know. Yes, forgers forge things, but then so do blacksmiths. Whatever.
If you're a forger, please comment below.
Yeah.
If you're a blacksmith, please comment below.
Point being that they have a very distinct, which I like, mysterious kind of cultural thing going on, almost with code, getting this back to the tribe. It's fairly different than the setup that they show in Rebels that I remember, Clone Wars, whatever. And I don't think you say, oh, well, this happened because 15 years ago they got bombed and they went from this. Like, they're two, I think, fairly different cultures.
I just think when you shrink down any people, sometimes customs and an identity get diluted when there's an acceptance. It's like so a family comes from a country and they move to America and their kids get absorbed into the general melting pot and mom and dad are mad because they don't come home for traditional dishes because they're at Burger King.
But presumably we're not talking about the kids. We're talking about mom and dad. And we're not talking about dilution. We're almost talking about it getting more extreme.
This is the exact... The thing is that it seems like the Mandalorians are out there in the world and doing everything to separate themselves from the general culture so that they can maintain what it is to be a true Mandalorian.
I get that. But I think even the terminology and things are different than they were in the other shows. And in a way that I think, just to your point of the people involved with the show are the same people who involved with the cartoon. So if you go from, in the animated series, calling them families or clans, now you're calling them tribes. Is that just, or tribe, is that accidental? Is it meaning, or are you subtly or drastically changing the fiction from a disparate clans type situation that you worked over there, but now, again, even though these are the same people, ideas change, thoughts change, things you think are cool change, coming at it from a different angle. There are some different people involved, like Jon Favreau, who had nothing to do with the animated series back in the day.
Yes, he did.
He was part of the animated series?
Yeah, he was the voice of one of the Mandalorians.
Okay. Creatively, was he part of it?
I don't know. I don't know, but...
So what I'm saying is it's not all the same people in a bubble. That are they changing things in a fundamental way with the Mandalorians by giving them some new and somewhat different lore in a world building sense than they gave in Clone Wars?
Yeah, I'm excited to find out. I like what they're doing here. I feel like because the way Star Wars has been, I mean, we're now a month out from
Rise of Skywalker,
which is bringing back Lando, and Chewie's in every movie.
Could they just bring Carl Weathers as older Lando?
I'm fine with Billy D. Williams
rolling in with a...
I mean, if you're gonna bring back Lando and Billy D. Williams can still play him, have Billy D. Williams play Lando Calrissian. I mean, he is Lando Calrissian, and you can't have another. I mean, Cindy Williams is still alive. Cindy Williams read for Princess Leia, and I watched
Laverne and Leia and Shirley.
Yeah, so Cindy Williams read for it. She's still alive, and why are we going to get digital Leia?
Well, because they can, and then they don't have to pay Cindy Williams anything to do it.
But I have to imagine...
If digital things didn't exist, if this had happened in the 70s, they probably would have gone and gotten Cindy Williams and put her in a Leia wig or whatever it took to make her look as much like Leia as possible and shuffled her out there. But they have the technology to do it a different way, so they're doing it. It's kind of like, there's a line in a movie from a play, I can't remember the name of it right now, but the guy basically says... He's talking about salesmen, and the guy essentially saying, but, well, why don't they just get robots to do that? And the guy says, if they could get robots to do what we would do, they would do it. And I think that Hollywood at this point is that they can get technology to do things, they're going to do it. If they didn't, then they would totally be calling up the Cindy Williams of the world to step in and put on makeup and do whatever and do that. But they can do it digitally, so they will. I guess I just liked Carl Weathers in the role.
Yeah, and I love him playing Grief. I don't need him playing Lando.
I mean, I guess I don't need Lando at all, but no. Look, I'm not upset at some of these guys getting work, and it's cool to see him shuffling around while he can. I was really happy with the Mandalorian. I think that minimal character. He's very much a man with no name.
He is
type thing, and the mask definitely helps with that because he doesn't even have to make his face a mask since he is a literal mask. You like the whole pared down thing. The one thing I find funny with the visor is that you see him positioning. To me, it just seems like, wouldn't somebody just lower the visor to look through the look through the eyepiece, or have some kind of integrated technology where the visor just zooms in for them? The thing they're doing and I noticed he did in two different places. One of them seemed like he positioned it over the eye, and I noticed in another shot it's kind of like right against the middle of his visor. Just seems a little bit like.
Well, he's
too much of like you
at
can see the
one point he's looking down the scope
through
of his rifle, and then at one point he seems to have some kind of telescope. And if it's the telescope off the rifle, he doesn't have the big taser rifle for the big fight.
I feel like that's where the conceit becomes a little bit too much, simply because he's all by himself, looking at people who can't see him. Clearly, you're going to lose something if you've got it up against your tinted visor. It's not going to be the same. Why wouldn't you, when you're all alone, at least pull up the tinted part so you can actually just get a look at it?
I don't think that goes up.
Well, then take off the visor. You can breathe there. Nick Nolte, whatever guy, was breathing fine. Everyone else was down there breathing fine. Do you see what I mean, it's just that point where you go, now you're not removing your mask because we, the audience, are here.
I'm sure the show...
Heck, even show him from behind, like hitting some button and then it kind of sliding up. And then
I guess so, but it's important we don't see his eyes because the eyes are
the windows into the soul. Well, then you use a trick camera angle so that we don't see that, but it just made it a little bit funny. Like, why are you putting, if you saw that in a movie where the guy took binoculars, had like a ski mask, like a motorcycle helmet, and took some binoculars, just put them up against the motorcycle helmet, you would think, well, that's just stupid. But that's pretty much the exact analog of what he did. He just puts it up against his visor.
Well, it is what it is.
But I like it. I like him. I like him a lot. He's the best version of a Mandalorian that they have made so far. He has already surpassed, in my mind, both Jango and Boba Fett, just because he's actually done stuff.
He's done some stuff. I also liked that after all these years of wondering what IG-88 would have been like if he'd actually done more than just stand completely stationary on the deck of the Executor. IG-11, voiced by Taika Waititi, is fantastic. They have a shootout scene in the pilot that looks great.
Definitely a Wild West kind of, what do you got? OK Corral type scene. I do find it interesting though. Why not just give it more guns? Why limit your IG unit with just essentially 2 guns? Granted, they can spin around, but why not throw like 8 guns on there? Why not just have them be a living gun?
I don't know. Why can't, if R2-D2 has jets where he can fly, why doesn't 3PO? Why doesn't R2-D2 fly anymore?
Well, he should never had those jets in the first place.
Right.
That's a different thing. I'm just talking about as a design. It's a robot. It's got. It seemed like it had all kinds of eyes. I don't know, those little tubes on its head things seemed to me like they could all see in different directions at once. I felt like, why not just give him a whole Gatling body of guns and just let him fire off in essentially 360 at all times? But yeah, no, he's cool. They have a nice little buddy team. I think it's good that they showed that he's not just I'm talking back to the Mandalorian now, that he has somewhat of a heart, or at least, if not a heart, he thanks people for helping him. He doesn't shoot the Baby Yoda when he finds him, which seemed to be the one. Now, granted,
yeah, and that's actually one up he has on the man with no name. And I'm referring to Clint Eastwood's character from
Clint Eastwood's character seems to have no motivation other than make
the three Sergio Leone films.
So I want to say he's got a little bit more of a
climaxing with the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right. I think for a few dollars more, he teams up with Lee Van Cleef, and I think he has kind of an angle in that one. He's not just
and they're not
the money.
They're not the same characters in each movie.
No, they just grouped them like that because it's all Clint Eastwood playing the similar type of person. Right. They're not supposed to be the exact same guy. Yeah, I like that he took care of the Baby Yoda. I don't think we know yet what he's going to do with it. Is he going to take it back?
You just spoiled the Baby Yoda.
We already said we're talking spoilers. So sorry, spoilers. He finds a Baby Yoda. 50-year-old Yoda still looks like a baby.
Which, it was funny at work, somebody was like, what is Yoda's species? And if you look up on .com, Yoda's species is classified as Yoda's species.
He's the only one?
Well, we saw a female Yoda in The Phantom Menace that the character was called Yaddle.
Oh,
and
boy.
Then that was supposed to be Yoda's sister?
Not wife.
Right. Yoda's sister. And then they didn't, and she was on the Jedi Council, and then they didn't do anything else with her.
Okay.
So where she is when Order 66 drops, what she did during the Clone Wars.
Unknown. Classified information.
Yes.
And we don't know. I think the weird thing maybe the only weird thing with that is who was feeding Baby Yoda. He's sitting in some kind of egg. He or she, we don't know even what gender, or, if it even has a gender. It is sitting in that egg under a net, just sitting in their storage room. It's unclear if those guys guarding it even knew what they had.
And the baby in this case is 50 years old.
Right.
But with 900 years you are, see how good you look.
Or in this case, 50 years, clearly that they haven't reached maturity yet. No, I really like The Mandalorian. I think the gripes I have with it are things I think are interesting. Don't really have anything to do with the characterization of the Mandalorian itself. I did find the Mandalore bar and grill a bit funny in some ways, just because it was very dark, kind of grimy, and these Mandalorians seem to be kind of down in their luck, hanging around. We don't know how many more there are, so we don't know if there's tons of them that are out on jobs, but it seemed like...
Well, that was one of the things I was wondering is the Mandalorian kind of a Dread Pirate Roberts situation?
In what way? That they'd swap costumes?
Like when Werner Herzog is saying, I heard you were the best in the Parsec. If all the Mandalorians are going out, building that rep, and just kind of keeping it a collective...
I don't know, because I feel like there's the status that comes with getting that Beskar steel and doing that stuff, and who gets that if I don't think you want to give that away. Now, there was something they mentioned, do you have your sigil yet? I think the forger or the blacksmith been revealed. And I thought that was interesting, and I'm sure it's going to play in the future, but it seems like another, at least, status symbol, but something that you obviously, or at least it seems like you don't give it's not something you give yourself, or they give themselves, or maybe they do, or what they have to accomplish to get one, or what that even means. So that's interesting, but I don't imagine that they would give it away. It seems like there's some kind of honor code of the merc, code of the bounty hunter, the guild. We're all part of the guild. I'm part of the guild too.
I also want to point out Pedro Pascal, who's playing the Mandalorian, is 44 years old.
Okay.
And so he's been at it for a little while, I think, the bounty hunting profession. And
now remember, he's just the voice, so we don't know that the Mandalorian has to have the same age.
No, he is in the outfit. He's on set.
Well, okay, even given that, though, actors will often play characters that have not the same age as them. We don't presume that the 30-year-old lady who's playing a teenager in high school had been held back in 9th grade for 15 years.
No, but I'm just wondering, in that they cast an actor in his mid-40s, if... I'm curious what it takes to reveal your signet. Why? Because as somebody in my 40s, I wonder about where one could arrest at different points in life to not have all the pieces. And are things like a rangefinder and a jetpack part of earning your bones in the Mandalorians?
I mean, it could be. I mean, we have no way of knowing. I mean, I think that they left a lot for him to have some interesting journeys that will help us, we'll uncover, we get to learn about at least this version of Mandalorians as they are uncovering it. It just seems pretty different than, getting back to what I was saying before, than what they did in the Clone Wars, but maybe, or in the animated stuff, but maybe that'll all come together in the wash. I don't care, because I don't care that much about what's canon or what's not. What I watch and what I see is canon, so to me. So if they decide to reverse it and go another way, I could care less. But it's interesting, I think, the different approach that they're doing with this, letting it be mysterious, kind of uncovering it bit by bit. I feel like they are making it much more ritualistic. They're words that seem to have extra weight attached to them. I wonder about the Forger's mask being a very Greek-like mask, which I mentioned in kind of our pre-chat, that it seemed like a real...
I mentioned it seems like she's got horns like Darth Maul.
That speaks back to that past. You're talking about when Darth Maul takes over the Mandalorian. So there's a lot of interesting stuff. And I'm looking forward to what the Mandalorian does with it. I think that's all. Do you have any final thoughts on the Fetts?
I'm just happy we got through our entire podcast without you railing against the carbon freezing that I was subjected to while we were getting ready.
Well, since you mentioned it, I will just bring this up as an aside. He couldn't let it go, so I'm going to bring it up. A little bonus, my short rant on the carbon freezing. In The Mandalorian, the Mandalorian makes a point of carbon freezing his bounty victims to take back to get paid on. And by the way, is it so easy in the future that everybody's got basically tracking devices that lead bounty hunters right to them? It seems very odd that you could just go and get somebody's fob. I do like the terminology, fobs and pucks.
I love that he gets paid in calamari flan.
Well, he had to. Well, do that or Imperial credits, and as he reminds Carl Weathers, the Imperial.
Calamari flan was like, it was squishy.
Yeah, it looked like it was made of mush.
Yeah,
like jelly. It was good.
It's the kind of money you would use in a sub.
Right. Yeah. That was good. So anyway, he carbon freezes his bounty victims, and I pointed out to Will that the whole thing with the Boba Fett or bounty hunters and carbon freezing is a bit of a sham because Boba Fett doesn't choose to carbon freeze Han Solo. It is not part of his protocol for bringing in bounties. The only reason why Han Solo ends up in carbon freeze is because that was Darth Vader's plan for Luke, and he needs a guinea pig. And Han Solo being that guinea pig, they try it on him, then they hand him off to Boba Fett, who just takes that carbon slab and goes off with it. And even the idea is that Boba Fett in Empire actually objects to the use of the carbonite, but Vader just says, well, we'll pay you if it doesn't work. Fast forward to now, and it's been turned into this, part of bounty hunting lore. And I get it from the sense that it makes sense with the imagery we have. I think there's a screenshot or there's a picture of Boba Fett pushing or pulling the carbonite slab to Slave One. It's kind of it's one of those just pictures that's become indelibly linked. But the funny part is that the carbonite slab literally has nothing to do with Boba Fett, other than that's what Vader gave him because of Vader's plans, but it's been turned into some kind of bounty hunting tradition. Like now, of course, bounty hunters put their victims in carbonite. And then Will was trying to make a case that there was what?
So the technology has been pioneered on Bespin, Cloud City.
There was an Ugnaught.
And the Ugnaughts worked on this technology.
That used to be the size of a giant room.
Right.
Which they've now got it into a small thing that's now in portable form.
Yes. Think about how fat your first iPod was back in 2003.
And now think about doing that during war times.
And I just think because yes, there was a giant room that was required to carbon freeze somebody in Empire Strikes Back. And in The Mandalorian, they seem to have these ready-made trays that you shove somebody in, and the carbon freezes them.
So that's a lot of ifs. If the Ugnaughts even knew that this whole thing worked out, because they had to have been following the news feed that was apparently saying what a great job it did taking this guy that they didn't know about out of there.
I figure after Lando Calrissian has to leave Cloud City to A, rescue Han, and B, join the rebellion.
The Ugnaughts figure out we got a new stream of income.
And, you know, like an unemployed person who loves doing woodwork goes up on Etsy and starts making swords and shields.
Oh, so there's an Etsy for carbonite freezing.
Cosplay enthusiasts. Maybe these Etsy Ugnaughts developed mobile carbon freezing technology because it became in vogue for the bounty hunters.
And it just so happened that the Mandalorian, being someone who is frequently on Star Wars Etsy,
it certainly made it possible for him to capture multiple bounties and bring them back.
There's no doubt that it's
run.
useful, but I believe I will stay by my point. I am not swayed by Star Wars Etsy.
And he kept them by the toilet.
Oh no, the toilets bit was great. It's simply the point is that they took
That's
that
our
image.
First Star Wars toilet, by the way.
They took that image and they just built off it, which makes sense from that standpoint. But when again you look at it a little deeper, you go, it doesn't really make sense because there was really no connection between bounty hunters, Mandalorians, and carbonite freezing. It was just coincidental.
And I want to point out to listeners, Todd he's being eloquent and kind, and we're having a very fair conversation about this. He was yelling at me on the street at a raised voice while we were walking to get dinner.
But he's used to that. It happens to him all the time.
And passerbys seemed shocked and frightened over our discussion about.
I think they're more shocked and frightened that you're calling out Ugnaughts by their names in the credits.
Etsy Ugnaughts.
Yeah, that's a new one. All right, I think we're done with this.
Boy, are we done with this. Hey, thanks for listening,
Thanks
everybody.
for listening. I hope you got your Boba Fett and Mandalorians fix. Until next time, I will talk to you later.
Bausch.